Tears streamed down her face as she watched Mona move with urgency, grinding the herb into juice as if his life depended on it. The stench of sickness filled the room, but he paid it no mind. As Mona worked quickly to make the juice from the herb, someone stood frozen in the corner of the room, watching in disbelief. It was Nina, his younger sister. Her eyes widened as she recognized her brother. She had been there, faithfully by the princess's side while others distanced themselves, and now she could hardly believe the man sent to save the princess was her own brother. Her heart raced. She remembered the last conversation she had with Mona. He had warned her to leave the palace, to come home with him because he feared for her safety. Yet here he was, risking his life for the same princess he once showed disdain for. Nina was overwhelmed by the depth of his selflessness. As Mona raised the cup to the princess's lips, Nina stood motionless, unable to move or speak. She watched with a mixture of shock, pride, and deep concern. Her brother had done what no one else was willing to do, and as the princess slowly began to regain her strength, Nina's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to run to him, to embrace him, but she held back, too stunned to believe what was unfolding before her. And as she drank, Lila could feel a change, a strange sensation like something was leaving her body, making her feel lighter and stronger. Soon, she sat up on her bed, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for saving my life." But with a hard face and a voice cold, Mona replied bluntly, "I didn't do this for you. I did it for your father, the king." The princess was taken aback, but she nodded in understanding. She knew she had done nothing to deserve his kindness. As Mona turned to leave, the king stepped forward, offering him a place to stay for the night. "Rest here in the palace, Mona," the king said. "In the morning, we will talk about anything you desire before you return home." But Mona shook his head. "Your Majesty, I owe nothing to anyone here. I did this not for reward, but because you have been a good ruler. You've sacrificed much for your people, and it was only right for someone to return the favor. I didn't see you as a king when I did this, I saw you as a father, asking for help to save his child." The king and the princess watched in silence as Mona turned and left the palace, walking quickly toward his home, determined not to linger any longer than he had to. The king felt immense gratitude toward Mona for his selfless act of saving his daughter, Lila. He knew that without Mona's bravery and pure heart, his daughter might not have survived. And as he watched Mona's tired figure disappear down the palace corridor, he understood he was not only courageous but also a man of true kindness. Lila, who had also been watching Mona leave, turned to her father with concern in her eyes. "Father, please send some of the palace guards after him," she said, her voice soft but filled with urgency. "He's exhausted, and the night is dangerous. I want to make sure he gets home safely." The king smiled, his heart swelling with pride at her request. His daughter, who had once been so self-absorbed, now showed genuine care for another. "Of course, my dear," he said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's a good thought. I'll send them immediately." With a nod, the king gave the order to his guards, who quickly left to follow Mona and ensure his safe return. The king turned back to Lila, his eyes gleaming with pride at the change he saw in her. Later that night, Princess Lila held Nina's hand tightly, her most trusted maid. Her voice shook as she said, "Someone finally saw the goodness in my father, and because of that, he saved me." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked into Nina's face, feeling the weight of all that had happened. Nina smiled, her grip on Lila's hand tightening in reassurance. "You've changed, my princess," Nina whispered. "And the people will see that too." That night, under the dim light of a lamp, Princess Lila spoke excitedly with Nina, her voice trembling with both hope and fear. She was determined to make things right with the people, but she was also anxious about how they would receive her apology. The next morning, The king called his elders together and told them about the recovery of his daughter and how Mona had seen through his heart as a kind ruler. The elders were relieved to see the king happy, but their excitement about the princess' good health was more muted. They remembered the princess's past, and forgiveness would take time. The king instructed his guards to announce a village gathering, where the people would meet once again at the village square. As the villagers gathered, many whispered, speculating about why they were being called. Some spoke in harsh tones, assuming the worst, that the princess must have died since no one had heard of her being saved. But to their surprise, the king stepped out with his daughter by his side. She no longer carried the beauty they had always known her for. Her skin still bore the marks of her illness, and she had lost weight, looking fragile. Seeing her in such a state saddened the people. With trembling hands, the princess folded them in front of her and took a deep breath. Her voice cracked as she began, "I stand before you today, not as a princess, but as someone who has hurt many of you. I now understand the pain I caused. I've realized the value of kindness and compassion, something I failed to show before." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she continued, her voice breaking with sincerity. "I ask for your forgiveness. I know I can't erase the past, but I promise to be better, to serve you with love and humility from this day forward." The crowd was silent as they listened, many wiping away tears of their own. Her words were raw, and the people could see how deeply she meant them. For the first time, they saw not just their princess, but a young woman who had changed. Lila then walked toward the woman whose baby she had once treated with cruelty during the festival. She knelt before her, bowing her head. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you and your child," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Please, let me make it right." The woman, overwhelmed by the princess's humility, smiled softly. With tears in her eyes, she handed the baby girl to Lila. The crowd watched in awe as the princess gently took the child into her arms, her expression soft and full of love. The woman looked on, her heart touched by the sincerity of the apology. As the princess held the baby, the people began to murmur with understanding. They could see her transformation, her genuine desire to make amends, and they began to forgive. The princess, once proud and ruthless, was now someone they could believe in again. She gently cradled the baby in her arms, her eyes soft with emotion. Looking at the mother, she smiled and said, "Your baby is beautiful." The mother, overwhelmed with joy, beamed at the compliment. Then, the princes asked, "May I name her?" Without hesitation, the mother nodded her approval, her face glowing with pride. Lila thought for a moment, then announced, "I shall call her Amanda." The crowd around them smiled, touched by the heartfelt moment. The once distant princess was now speaking with warmth and sincerity, and the villagers could feel the change in her. That evening, the king was overjoyed. He praised his daughter for her kindness, feeling incredibly proud of the transformation in his daughter. However, as the evening wore on and Lila sat alone in her chamber, her thoughts couldn't shake free from Mona. No matter how hard she tried, his face stayed in her mind. His words echoed in her head. He wanted nothing in return from the royal family, and yet, Lila felt she owed him something more. She felt a need to see him, to thank him properly, even though he had asked for nothing. What the princess didn't know was how closely connected everyone around her truly was. So, later that night, while speaking with her most trusted maid, Nina, she asked if she knew anything about Mona, the man who had saved her life. To Lila's surprise, Nina revealed that Mona was her brother. Lila's eyes widened in disbelief. How small the world had suddenly seemed. The brother of the maid she had once treated poorly turned out to be the one who saved her life. Nina, understanding the princess's desire, offered to take her to see Mona. Without hesitation, the princess quickly dressed, paying no mind to the lingering marks of her illness on her skin. She was determined. Together, they left the palace and headed toward Mona's house. When they arrived, the door was closed, and Nina explained that her brother must have gone to the farm and would likely return before sunset. But Lila didn't mind. She sat by the door with Nina, talking and laughing, enjoying a rare moment of simplicity. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Mona finally appeared, tired but content, carrying his farming tools. He looked up and noticed the two women waiting for him. Unlike the distant, cold man she had seen the night he saved her, Mona now smiled as he set down his tools. Approaching them, he raised an eyebrow, curious, and asked, "What brings the princess to my home? Why aren't you with your usual maidens?" But Lila simply smiled, her heart lightened by his presence. "Nina is enough company for me," she replied, her tone playful. Mona's expression remained neutral, neither pleased nor displeased. He turned to Nina, "Get the princess inside. I'll be with her in a moment." Then, without another word, he walked over to join them, sitting down beside the princess. His tone was calm but curious. "So, what brings you here, princess?" he asked, looking at her with genuine interest. She looked at him, her heart pounding slightly. She wasn't sure exactly what to say. But in this quiet moment, away from the palace, she knew she had come to express more than just gratitude. As Princess Lila prepared to respond to Mona, Nina entered the room carrying a tray of food. Mona's eyes softened, memories flooding back as he looked at his sister. Gently, but with a serious tone, he asked, "When are you coming home, Nina? Or do you want me to come and bring you myself?" Nina immediately dropped her head, sadness washing over her. The princess, watching the exchange, was confused by the sudden tension. Why was Mona upset with Nina? Why did he seem eager to bring her home? Lila's heart raced as she tried to make sense of it, but before she could dwell on it, Mona turned his attention back to her. He noticed Lila's confusion but chose not to push the matter further with his sister, instead telling Nina they'd speak later. Lila's thoughts swirled. Was Mona trying to take Nina away from the palace? She hoped that wasn't the case. Pushing her concerns aside, she took a deep breath and turned to Mona, ready to express her gratitude. "Mona," she began softly, "you saved my life. I don't know how to thank you enough. You're the reason I'm standing here today." But before the princess could continue, Mona shook his head, waving away her praise. "No, princess," he said firmly, "don't thank me. Thank the gods for guiding my heart and your father's good deeds, which touched me. It wasn't just me, it was fate." She felt humbled by his words. She had come to thank him for his bravery, but Mona refused to take the credit. His humility surprised her, and she realized just how selfless he truly was. The tension from earlier faded as she spoke again, this time with even more sincerity. "I'm sorry for my past actions, Mona. I see things differently now. I'd like to start fresh, not just with the village, but with you too. Could we be friends?" Mona was taken aback by the princess's openness and vulnerability. He smiled slightly, nodding. "We can," he said simply. He was a man of few words, but Lila could see in his eyes that he appreciated her gesture. He didn't say much, letting her do most of the talking, but his gaze never left her face as she spoke. Lila continued to express her gratitude, but she couldn't help but notice that Mona was watching her with a quiet intensity. His eyes softened as she talked, and though he didn't offer many words, she felt his understanding. For the first time, she felt a genuine connection with someone outside the palace walls. Mona wasn't just listening to her, he was seeing her for who she truly was. The conversation flowed naturally, and Mona's heart softened even more as the princess praised his sister, Nina. "Nina has always admired you, princess," Mona said with a hint of pride in his voice. "I'm glad she's had the chance to see you in this light." The princess smiled warmly, feeling a deep sense of peace in that moment. As they sat together, talking and sharing a quiet meal, She realized how much had changed in such a short time. That night, when Princess and Nina returned to the palace, a smile lingered on Lila's face. For the first time, she had spoken to a man in such a close setting, and instead of feeling uneasy, she felt an unexpected joy rising in her heart. It was the first time she felt like this. In the days that followed, Lila began to immerse herself in the village, associating with the elders, the mothers, and the children. She showed kindness in every action, and the people started to see the princess in a new light. Mona too was happy to see this change. The village was lively, and the princess's transformation filled everyone with joy. But Mona couldn't ignore the feelings growing inside him. One evening, he sat outside his hut, deep in thought. He had begun to like the princess, and it brought him joy to see her every day. Something in his heart told him that she was the one for him. And no matter how hard he tried to suppress his feelings, he couldn't deny the truth, he was falling for her. Every evening, after a long day at the farm, Mona would take the path that led him near the palace, just to catch a glimpse of her. And every day, the princess would wait anxiously for his arrival, her heart racing with excitement. The palace maidens noticed their secret meetings and would always rush to inform the princess whenever Mona passed by, knowing how happy it made her. Lila was filled with joy, but her father, the king, had been watching closely. He was pleased to see the bond growing between his daughter and Mona, but he also had his concerns. One day, he called his daughter to talk to her. "Mona is a good man," the king said, his tone stern but caring. "If you are simply having fun or playing with his feelings, you must stop immediately." The princess was taken aback. "We're just friends, father," she said, confused by his concern. The king's expression grew more intense. "No, Lila. He loves you. A man like Mona knows what he wants, and he goes for it. He's just like me when I was young, determined and sure. I see him around the palace, and it reminds me of myself. Don't take his kindness for granted." That night, Lila lay in bed, her mind filled with thoughts of her father's words. She understood his worries, and she knew she had to be careful. But deep down, she feared her father might be wrong. Mona was a man of honor, someone who wouldn't be swayed by wealth or status. But could he truly love someone like her, with all the mistakes she had made? The princess knew in her heart that she loved Mona. He was the kind of man she had always dreamed of. But the question that haunted her was whether she was the kind of woman he would want in return. As the days passed, Mona realized he could no longer hold his feelings back. He had fallen deeply in love with Princess Lila, and it didn't matter to him what her past was or her royal status. What truly mattered was whether she felt the same for him. That evening, he arranged to meet Lila, and as they sat together, the conversation started light but quickly became serious. He knew this was the moment. He looked into her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "Lila," he said softly but with conviction, "I can't hide it anymore. I love you. Not because you're a princess, not because of what you've been through, but because of the person you are today. Over these past weeks, I've seen the kindness and strength in your heart. And I know my feelings are real." Lila was taken aback. She had admired Mona's bravery and pure heart, but she never expected to hear those words from him. Her mind raced, but before she could respond, Mona continued. "I don't care about your past or your status. What matters to me is you. And I need to know if what you feel for me is real, or if it's just gratitude for saving your life." Tears welled up in Lila's eyes as she listened to his heartfelt confession. For so long she had been burdened by her past mistakes, but hearing Mona's words made her feel worthy of love again. "Mona," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I never thought I deserved someone like you. But now I see, you're right. I am more than my past. You have shown me that. I love you too, with all my heart." Mona smiled, his heart swelling with joy. He gently wiped away her tears and said, "You are a good person, Lila. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Don't ever doubt that." That night, the princess told her father about Mona's confession, and the king couldn't have been happier. Nina too was overjoyed for her brother and the princess. And as weeks went by, Mona and Lila spent time together, their love growing stronger each day. After months of courtship, Mona approached the king to formally ask for the princess's hand in marriage. The king was delighted, as well the royal palace. The villagers rejoiced when they heard the news, knowing that a selfless man like Mona would lead them with love and fairness. The day finally arrived, when Mona and Princess Lila were joined in holy matrimony, blessed by their people and the gods. They settled in Mona's humble home, sharing a simple but happy life, surrounded by love. A year later, they welcomed their first daughter, whom they named Ola. The village celebrated the birth of their future ruler, knowing that under Mona and Lila's reign, their future was bright. As time passed, Mona and Lila ruled the village with wisdom and compassion, and the people cherished them as leaders who truly cared for their well-being. They raised their daughter in a home filled with love and joy, and their legacy of kindness continued to flourish. The moral lesson of this story is that love, kindness, and genuine character transcend social status and outward appearances. It teaches that true connection is built on mutual respect and sincerity, rather than wealth or power. The princess learns to appreciate the goodness in others, particularly Mona, who values her for who she truly is, not her title or beauty. The story also emphasizes personal growth, forgiveness, and the power of redemption, showing that people can change and become better versions of themselves through understanding and compassion. And this brings us to the end of our tale. If you're enjoying our tale and would love to see more, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below. Also, hit the notification bell to stay updated whenever a new chapter is released. Your support keeps the story going, and we'd love to hear your thoughts.